Good evening, councillors, members of the public, officers and those that might be joining us by webcast this evening. Welcome to this meeting of Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee here at Maidstone Borough Council today, Tuesday the 12th of September 2017. Before we start, if I can just advise you that we have no planned fire evacuations this evening, so if we do hear the sound, it will be the real thing. And then I would ask you to follow Ms Tunnicliffe's instructions. This is the lady to my right, and she will tell us how to leave the building safely. May I also advise you that tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but I would ask if anybody else is intending to record, they would let me know now. That's not to prevent you, but just so that others in the room would be aware. And I don't see anybody indicating an intention to record. So if we go straight to business, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. There are no apologies. And therefore it follows on agenda item 2, we have no substitute members sitting this evening. Item 3, we have no urgent items for additional inclusion. And at item 4, if I may take a note, please, of visiting members that will wish to speak, or visiting members present, and if you would indicate which items you wish to speak. I've had advance notice that Councillor Mrs Bryce hopes to attend. She may be a little late and has indicated that she would like to speak on both items 15 and 16. If I start there, would you come to the microphone and just announce yourself, please?
Councillor Hasty, I'm just observing.
Observing, thank you.
Councillor Spooner to speak on item 16.
Thank you, that's noted.
Councillor Perry to speak on item 16.
Again noted, thank you. When it comes to visiting members, I will take them in the order that we've recorded, starting with Councillor Bryce if she has arrived, and then as noted. Agenda item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures this evening, please? Nobody indicates, so we'll note that as no disclosures. Item 6, disclosures of lobbying. Certainly for myself, I will say that I've been lobbied in matters concerning the local plan. I think that would be relevant to note for all members present. Are there any other disclosures of lobbying that we should record? Councillor English.
I was, I suppose, specifically lobbied by the compiler of the petition from Staplers, because originally it was going to me rather than to this committee. So okay. I had to sort that out.
I think that's useful to clarify. When I said matters relating to the local plan on behalf of all of us, it was very much with that in mind, so we'll make clear that is noted in that way. If there's no other disclosures of lobbying, we're on to agenda item 7. There are no yellow papers in front of us this evening, so I propose that all matters will be in public. Is that agreed, members? And next we can move to agenda item 8, which is the minutes from the meeting held on the 11th of July. I should have started by saying, welcome back after the summer break. We didn't meet in August. But minutes from 11th of July circulated with the agendas. I trust you've all had a chance to peruse and verify. Does anybody have any observations or corrections that they'd like to raise? Since there appear to be none, with your agreement, I shall sign those as a true record. Is that agreed? Thank you. We're next at item 9, which is the presentation of petitions. I have been advised that we have one petition this evening. This will be presented by Dr. Duncombe. If you would like to come to the table, please. You have up to 5 minutes to introduce your petition to us.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Alistair Duncombe of 26 The Bartons in Staplehurst. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to stand before your committee today to present my petition. The petition calls for Maidstone Borough Council to respect the wishes of the residents of Staplehurst and to remove the land to the north of Henhurst Farm from the Maidstone local plan. It is a petition that has been signed by about 1,000 people. The petition came about after we saw the site being mapped out by surveyors in July. We were confused as we were aware that the site did not feature in the Staplehurst neighbourhood plan. We did some research and learnt about the Maidstone local plan and its inclusion in there. It seemed wrong that our neighbourhood plan was being ignored. As a person who feels strongly about upholding the values of democracy and fairness, I therefore initiated this petition in the summer. We have been delighted by the response. The petition powerfully shows how much local anger there is over this matter. I would like to outline some of the reasons why I think the site should be removed. Firstly, its continued inclusion within the local plan does not seem to adhere to the spirit of the 2011 Localism Act. This Act was intended to make the planning system more democratic and to ensure that decisions about housing were taken locally. Neighbourhood development plans were introduced as a means by which communities would be able to choose where they wanted new homes to be built. Safeguards were introduced to try to prevent there being 2 development plans for an area that were at loggerheads. The neighbourhood plan needs to be consistent with the strategic development needs of the council. A report by this committee concluded that the Staplehurst neighbourhood plan did make sufficient provision for new housing and did meet its contribution to the council's objectively assessed need. On the basis of this assessment, Maidstone Borough Council gave approval for the Staplehurst neighbourhood plan to go to a referendum, and in that referendum it was overwhelmingly approved. Since the referendum, there does not seem to have been any attempts to bring the 2 plans together. There are other reasons why the site should not be developed. It is a site which is enjoyed by many people every day. From the northern edge of the site, you get one of the best views in Staplehurst. It's a view down to the valley below, and then up to the sheep grazing on the hill opposite, and then over that hill to the hills and woodland beyond. It's a scene that is freely available as footpaths cross the field. CPRE Kent gave evidence to say that developing the site will have a harmful effect on landscape character. Access to the site is poor. It is likely to be via the Bartons, but this is a narrow, unadopted residential road. As a parent of a young son myself, safety is something that concerns me. Children regularly play in this road, and there are not proper pavements along parts of it. Emergency access could be via Bell Lane, but this is a narrow, unadopted country lane. The soil is heavy clay and drainage is likely to be poor. Since the Bartons was built, neighbouring properties have experienced some flooding. The residents of the Bartons have also experienced their own drainage problems. Some of us have spent thousands of pounds correcting these. The development also impacts heavily on the scores of people who either face directly onto the site or whose houses back onto it. The site is also directly adjacent to a nature area which is home to protected species such as bats, newts, snakes and slowworms. There are also huge numbers of birds that live and nest in the area. There are also concerns regarding the lack of infrastructure in Staplehurst. It still does not have a major supermarket, its last main remaining bank has closed, the school and doctors are struggling with demand, the sewers are full to capacity and the roads just cannot cope with more and more traffic. So to conclude, Maidstone Council gave the people of Staplehurst a referendum over their plan. This committee said that the neighbourhood plan delivered an adequate amount of housing, but now it seems that Maidstone Council is not respecting the outcome of the referendum. There is nothing that people hate more than being given an illusion of democracy. I appreciate that the local plan is at a late stage. I also very much appreciate that a lot of hard work has gone into the plan. But as a former teacher and now as a parent, I often say that if you're going to do a job, make sure it's done properly. It would be a great shame if after years of hard work, your plan is left with this smear over it. It is never too late to do what is right and to correct an injustice. I ask you and Maidstone Council to remove this site from their local plan.
Thank you, and that was absolutely impeccable timing to the last second of the 5th minute. Well done. Members, the Constitution allows us 3 options when dealing with petitions. We could refer it to the next meeting and ask for a report. That, I think, in this instance would be completely pointless. We could discuss it without a report, or, and I think this is the most appropriate option, that we consider it at this meeting in conjunction with the report that's already on the agenda, and I think that's entirely relevant to agenda item 15. So with your agreement, 16, apologies, with your agreement we will actually give consideration, if we wish to do so, at that agenda item. Item 10, question and answers from the public. There are no questions submitted to us this evening. Item 11, outside bodies, verbal updates from members where you've attended on behalf of this committee. I have a couple of things to mention, but does anyone else? Okay, well, I would just report back to you that in accordance with your wishes, both the chairman, both myself and the vice chairman did meet with Headcorn Parish Council and members of the Headcorn Neighbourhood Planning Group with officers. There was quite a long discussion. There's further work ongoing. They've submitted some amendment suggestions which officers are currently suggesting. So just to report back that that meeting did take place. And the other thing I would just draw to your attention, I did attend the Quality Bus Partnership when it last met as an observer for this committee. And Councillor English.
Mr Chairman, are you aware of the rather odd recommendation of Democracy Committee in respect to the Quality Bus Partnership, which really does concern me?
I can't say that I am aware of that, Councillor English. Would you
Without
like to?
Thinking about it very carefully, the Democracy Committee has come forward with a list of outside bodies this Council should no longer support. I'm very concerned, given that we are supposedly trying to have an integrated transport strategy and work together with public transport operators, that the Quality Bus Partnership, Medway Valley Rail Line and the Rail Partnership, which has been very useful to this committee, has been recommended for deletion by that committee without any reference to whether this committee, which is involved in that field, thinks it's a good idea or not. Admittedly, that's going to full council, but it's a pretty potty situation.
Well, thank you for alerting us to that. I mean, certainly my attendance to the Quality Bus Partnership is under the direction of what is currently in our constitution. So as you've pointed out, that'll be a matter at full council, and we can all have our say at that time. Thank you for drawing that to our attention.
Well, I was hoping that this committee would feel that, that public transport, I know it's not on the agenda, but I do feel that members ought to think about what, as members of this committee, doing more than noting it, because it cuts directly across the work of this committee. I know we can't resolve anything tonight because it wasn't on the agenda, but it is a matter of concern. And I would like, if Council endorses that decision, well, we shall see, and I will return to it. But I think we need, as members, to be doing more than just, we can't call it in, it's not a service committee. But so I leave that.
Well, just for a bit of clarity, do you know that that's intended for the next meeting of full council, or the one after?
I will need to find out. If it's going to the next one,
then we don't have the opportunity.
If it isn't,
if not, we could actually have an agenda item discussion around that in advance of.
That's essentially what I was asking for, if time permit.
We'll ask the committee clerk to make a note of that for the next agenda setting meeting. Councillor Cox, you've indicated.
Thank you very much. I was present at the meeting that Councillor English is describing, and I don't know whether it's on record on the webcast, because I believe there was some interruptions to that, but I did state exactly what we have just been speaking about, that I think it is poor show that we are giving the outward impression that we don't want to be involved with any decisions or be communicated with via many of these things that have been struck off. And I thought the work that had been done to bring that report to Democracy Committee was full and had taken a long time, and the recommendations were complete. But the actual committee then went through a process of arbitrarily saying X doesn't comply, therefore all in favour of removing it, and it was gone. So I have registered my thing at that point, and I did say...
Enough said for now. Yeah. If the timing of the full council allows, we can look at giving that some formal consideration and having a committee response if it's felt appropriate. We'll move on. We've got two smaller items, and then we've got agenda item 15 and 16. With your agreement, I think it would be appropriate to actually bring item 16 ahead of 15. It's the big piece of business that we have this evening. But we will deal with 13 and 14 first, and that may allow officers that are not required for the other item to leave. So we'll start with item 13. I've missed one. Committee work programme, item 12, circulated with the papers, subject to what we've just said about the Democracy Committee item. It's for information only. You will see that there's plenty for us to be doing. It's just for noting, really. Is that Councillor de Wiggenen?
I just have one quick question. Were in relation to the brownfield sites register, we'll be going to have something about that. Firstly, is there that? And secondly, what's the process going to be? Because one of my parishes has now said, is there consultation with them over it? When do they get to see it as well? So I just thought I'll ask the question.
I think it is just the compilation of a register. Mr. Egerton, could you give some clarity?
Members will recall that a report was received at last SPS&T regarding the brownfield register. We are taking that forward as a matter of course. There's two parts to that register, and part one will be put on the website in accordance with the government's deadline, and part two will be implemented as required. But at this stage, there's no change from the report which was provided to the last meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity. Councillor English.
I think, I can't see it here, it may be here, I may have skipped over it. I think we've got probably coming to the October meeting, the response to the consultation on the motorways.
Yes, the Highways England have recently commenced an early stage consultation on M2 Junction 5. We will be adding to this work programme with that item. We'll bring that to hopefully the October SPS&T. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If there's nothing to add on the matter of the work programme, we'll move straight ahead to 13. Key performance indicators, performance report, and Mrs. Collier, you're going to give us an introduction to this, I believe.
Good evening, members. This is the Q1 performance report for the period April to June this year, presented slightly later due to the summer break. The KPIs in this report were selected by members of this committee earlier this year, and a summary can be seen on page 14 along with performance. Members may note this report is slightly shorter than previous reports presented. This was following feedback from both members and officers to make the report more concise and easier to read. As I said, on page 14 is a summary, but as an overview, major planning applications and other planning applications have both exceeded target. The number of affordable homes delivered has missed target, and minor applications has also missed target, but within 10% of the indicator of the target. Also, we've got a direction of travel that's shown at the moment as long trend, which means the same quarter last year, and short trend, which is from previous quarter. You'll note that 3 of the indicators of the direction of travel is down for those, so members may want to keep an eye on that, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We're simply asked to note this evening, but before doing so, do members wish to add any comment? Councillor Willis?
Can I ask a question? I wish I'd got it in on the previous item, really, but it is relevant. When does the review of the planning department get reported back? Is that included in this? I can't see it particularly much.
I think that has no connection to this agenda item at this point. But it is to be reported back at the next meeting, the 26th.
Thank you for accommodating that.
So for my own part, I think the one that on face value might worry us is affordable homes delivery. However, because that is just 1 quarter standalone and these tend to come through in batches, I don't think we should necessarily be massively concerned, and the report does state that we anticipate being on target for the year. And then the other one, processing of planning applications, that's a very, very slender miss of the target, and it's almost a shame that the arrow points the wrong way, but it's very, very close. Councillor Mrs Springer?
Sorry, just on that item on affordable homes, I just wondered, it has been quite publicised in the national press that, especially in London, sites are delivering a lot less affordable homes than they originally were supposed to, and planning authorities have been agreeing. Has just our planning officer, Mr John, able to tell me, has that been happening at all on any of our sites, or are we generally getting the number of affordable homes that were agreed? In other words, have we been pressured into, oh, I'm sorry, we can't afford to do quite that many? So are we following that national trend, or are we actually managing to maintain what was planned?
There's no significant problem with the delivery of affordable housing. However, within the category of affordable housing, it's a broad church, isn't it? The housing developers aren't keen on providing the rented affordable houses. They would much prefer the shared equity products, and that is the big discussion with them, and that's where there's discussions around viability. Thank you.
Mr Cornwall, you want to add to that?
Yes, just to add one further thing. I haven't necessarily got the figures to back this up, but I thought the feeling would be that in the urban area is where the developers struggle most to deliver the policy requirement in terms of affordable housing because of the complexity of brownfield sites. Maybe it's more of a challenge there than the outlying sites.
Is it agreed that we note the report this evening? Is that agreed? Thank you. Next on to agenda item 14, first quarter budget monitoring, and Mr Green will introduce this for us.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. This is a report on the first quarter's financial performance, obviously still relatively early in the year. The position for the first quarter was that we underspent the budget by 241,000, so a significant underspend. But looking forward, the position isn't quite as positive. The table at 2.6 of the report on page 17 shows the major variances that we're expecting for the year as a whole. First of all, we've provided an extra 200,000 for the cost of appeals, and clearly this is an area where it's very difficult to be certain what actual costs will be. So this is the best estimate at the moment, and the actual cost could be much more than this if things don't go our way, but this is the best estimate at the moment. But offsetting that, there has been continued strong performance on parking, so that projected underspend of 144,000 of parking reduces the overall projected overspend for the year. At the moment, we're projecting an overspend of 89,000 for the year, but there's a lot of time between now and the end of the year, and we'll be working to try and bring the position back within budget between now and then. Details of all the variances by cost centre are set out in the table on page 21. And I'm very happy to take any questions that members may have on those. Thank you.
Members, any questions or comments? Okay. I'm tempted. Oh, Councillor Willis.
We discussed at the last meeting about the national government effect on a change to the plan, us being able to increase planning charges. Does that isn't, I'm just going through, yeah, well, is that because this is actual performance rather than projected?
Yeah, this is dealt with in paragraph 2.7. You're absolutely right, Councillor Willis, to say that we haven't been able to introduce the increase in fees so far, but there's no net impact on the budget because we were hoping for additional income, which we would have used for extra expenditure. The two offset one another, so we haven't had the income, but equally we haven't been incurring the expenditure. So no overall impact, although it's not ideal not having that income.
After you, Councillor Willis.
Will we be able, I suppose that's a very basic question, perhaps I should know if it's national knowledge, but will we be able to start charging a higher rate for planning? Because I think it's about the government bill which the general election prevent. What's the long-term?
Assuming that the government passes the legislation, then we will be able to, but we don't know exactly when that will be.
But it was in the Queen's speech.
It's
Good. Yeah. So we should get some benefit at some point. Okay.
So just picking up on that same point. So my understanding is this positive variance at the moment is because there's an influx of applications currently. But that might imply there's also a lot of work yet to do in servicing those applications in the background and the cost that follows with that. So I have a slight fear that that paints a rather rosier picture than perhaps it is in its completeness. The one that really worries me there is the cost of appeals. I don't want to prejudice the debate we're yet to have, but the certainty of a plan might help there. And parking is our saving grace at the moment. And we know there are plans for car parks, but beyond that, Councillor English, you've indicated, and then I've got Councillor Pendergast.
I won't comment on the appeals issue because we all know what that's about. I would say that following on from your comment on development control income, the problem is it's inherently unpredictable because these things slow up and slow down depending on essentially the state of the market. So it could be good now, but that could be because people have decided to put them in now instead of 3 months from now, so we could end up, so it's inherently unpredictable. I would observe on, what I really want to talk about is parking. I think it's very, whilst it's commendable for the council to look at various commercialisation projects, and, you know, that's a good thing in some ways, we do have to be aware that, you know, just taking out good revenue streams like car parking, which we have consistently depended upon to bail us out year in, year out, does have a significant downside. I'm not prejudging any planning applications that are coming through, but it is something we have to bear in mind, because if it wasn't for the consistent robustness of car parking charges, which we may want to twiddle around with to some degree about what hierarchy they are as a result of the air quality low emissions work that's been going on. But we need these charges in some shape or form, otherwise the council's revenue budget is going to look like a rather flat souffle.
And you can't charge for a car park if you don't have it anymore. Councillor Mrs Prendergast.
Thank you, Mr Green. Just a quick question, and where you talk about the council's constitution and cost centres exceeding £30,000, is there an allowance made here for, I'm not projecting our future here, but for any sort of possible legal action against this council, sort of judicial reviews, etc.? Is that costed anywhere? Thank you.
So far as planning applications are concerned, that's dealt with in the cost centre for appeals, and as I've pointed out already, the estimate is that we'll have a 200,000 overspend there, but I'll repeat what I said before, it's very difficult to predict those costs, and of course we don't know what's going to happen for the remaining 6 or 7 months of the year in terms of legal action.
Am I right to say that there's actually a larger sum in the medium-term financial strategy? You know, there's actually £500,000. Is that the figure that rings a bell that's actually penciled in for this risk?
We highlighted that as a risk, yes.
Thank you. Members, again, we're asked to note. Is that noted? Thank you. As I indicated earlier, we will take agenda item 16 next. And also, I'll just take this opportunity to note that Councillor Mrs Gooch has joined us, and we've added you to the speaking list for this item. So we'll move on. Mr Egerton, if you would be kind enough to introduce this report to us.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, members, Maidstone Borough's local plan has certainly been on a journey over recent years, and it is now nearing the end of the production process set out by the government. Officers have provided this report within that context. The report provides some background on the preparation of the local plan, including the role of the government's national planning policy framework. We then seek to remind members of the recent events regarding Maidstone's local plan production process. For example, we set out the role of the independent examination of the local plan by an inspector appointed by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. That examination included 21 days of hearings, spread between October and January. Members will recall that following the examination hearings, the inspector asked the Council to undertake a final public consultation on what's termed main modifications to the Maidstone local plan. These were modifications arising from debates in the examination hearings themselves. The Council also took the opportunity to consult on minor changes, and these comprised factual updates and corrections of minor errors, for example. This public consultation took place from the end of March to the middle of May. Members will note that the inspector has now found that the local plan is sound, subject to the inclusion of the specified main modifications. This has come about through the inspector's final report, which was dated the 17th of July 2017. These main modifications were virtually the same as those consulted on earlier this year, apart from 6 amendments that were considered necessary by the inspector, and these are set out in paragraph 2.22 of the report. Members will have noted the content of the inspector's report, but it is a lengthy document, and a summary of the inspector's final report is provided in Appendix 1. One of the key consequences of the main modifications was a restructuring of the local plan itself, so Appendix 6 is presented with the restructuring having taken place, along with the other changes. The policies map, illustrating the spatial expression of the local plan, the geographical distribution of zonings, for example, has also been modified to reflect the previously noted sequence of changes. So it appears that planning legislation is restrictive as to the overall decisions that may be taken by members at this stage, and this is set out in more detail in the report, of course. However, we've identified 2 areas of input. The first is in respect of factual and typographical changes. Although the team have pored over the Appendix 6 local plan, there are likely to still be a few factual and typographical corrections. To this end, the Chairman emailed members recently asking them to pass any such changes that they spot to me. And I'm particularly grateful to Councillors Munford and Springett, both of whom have spotted changes, so thank you very much indeed for those. Now, these changes are contained in a working spreadsheet held by officers, and so if members do spot any further changes, I propose to investigate these and add them to this list as appropriate. If members agree to recommend the local plan to full council for their decision around adoption, this list of changes can also be incorporated into the local plan itself. The second area of input is in respect of the decision-taking process itself. As I've just noted, this committee is not being asked to adopt the local plan. It's being asked to make a recommendation to full council that the local plan incorporating the policies map and made no modifications is adopted. So the report sets out the implications of each decision, and Section 3 of the report presents the two options to members. So Section 3 here states option A, that the committee recommends that the local plan incorporating the main modifications and policies map are adopted by the council, or option B, the committee recommends that the local plan incorporating the main modifications and policies map is not adopted by the council. So, members, I would refer you finally just to the final recommendation, which is contained at the front of this report, which the officer recommendation is that the Maidstone Borough local plan, incorporating those main modifications in the policies map, to be sent to full council with a recommendation to be adopted. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I shall move to visiting members next. Councillor Mrs Brice is not with us, so Councillor Spooner, you're on.
Good evening, members. Development at Woodcut Farm and elsewhere around Junction 8 has been consistently and strongly opposed by all local borough and county councillors, by all local parish councils, by our previous MP Hugh Robertson and our current MP Helen Whately, by local people and by Leeds Castle, the second most visited tourist attraction in Kent. Some of you may already be aware that Helen Whately has now written to Sajid Javid, the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, asking him to call in the plan. I and many other local people and organisations are disappointed that despite so many objections from so many people, the local planning inspector was persuaded to include Woodcut Farm as a unique opportunity to provide a business park. His conclusion flies in the face of previous decisions by planning inspectors, the Secretary of State and the High Court to consistently reject all applications for development around Junction 8. As a new borough councillor, I find it incomprehensible how Woodcut Farm found its way into the local plan after Maidstone Borough Council's own planning committee had consistently refused all planning applications in the area and continued to do so up until July 2016. Woodcut Farm will concrete over 50 acres of countryside in an isolated rural area. It will provide 49,000 square metres of business space, of which only 10,000 square metres will be reserved for offices. So far as I'm aware, there is no demand for office space in Maidstone, and I would therefore strongly suspect that the entire site will be used for warehousing. The local planning inspector goes into some detail to justify his conclusions on Woodcut Farm, but he fails to address and explain that in one fell swoop, development on this site will sweep away all the previous compelling objections to development elsewhere around Junction 8. I'm sure the logistics and distribution industry will have already latched onto this, and I'm sure that other applications for warehousing will soon be submitted and the Borough Council will be unable to resist them, or if it does, they will be allowed on appeal because of the precedent set by Woodcut Farm. We all know that in planning law there's no thing as precedent, but I think we have to accept the principle of development creep and the fact that other land is compromised by development which takes place. In conclusion, I think the stark choice before you this evening is to either delay the adoption of the local plan so that further consideration can be given to Woodcut Farm, or adopt the local plan in its present form and see Woodcut Farm and its surrounding land be developed into a low-value, low-wage warehousing estate. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Perry, if you wish.
Chairman, members, The north of Henhurst Farm site, H150, has been a long and sorry saga. This site was agreed to be added to the local plan at the last minute against strong advice of local councillors who were familiar with the problems of this site. It had quite rightly been rejected by both scrutiny and Cabinet before because of surface water flooding, drainage and, most important of all, lack of access. As matters currently stand, access will be through a new housing development never designed for this and would require a narrow 90-degree turn. It would be manifestly absurd. But the danger is that by leaving it in the local plan, it would be given significant weight, which would make it very difficult for a planning committee to refuse. This site should never have been included in the local plan in the first place, and the way that it was slipped in was, in my view, extremely unfair. And for the following reasons, I believe this must be corrected. The site is not in the adopted and made Staplehurst neighbourhood plan. Full council agreed this plan, despite the fact that difference with the emerging local plan was known. No attempt was made by Maidstone Borough Council to resolve this conflict, despite DCLG guidance requiring them to do so. I believe MBC have been fundamentally remiss in not doing this. Over 92% of the residents of Staplehurst who voted in their referendum voted in favour, and MBC should respect this vote. Instead, it was seen that MBC have just brusquely dismissed residents' letters. I think the residents of Staplehurst, and indeed the borough as a whole, deserve better than this. I stated to the council that it has been a roller coaster ride just getting a neighbourhood plan adopted, and at times I have had the feeling that although in the end we did get a lot of assistance from MBC, and this was much appreciated, most of the time the neighbourhood plan has been about as popular with MBC as an angry wasp, and if they could swat it, they would have done. Nevertheless, despite all this, the plan was passed by an inspector, an independent inspector, as being in general conformity with the local plan. So it is difficult to see why Maidstone Borough Council did not pick this up, the difference with this emerging local plan. The site represents just 0.34% of the objectively assessed need as agreed by the inspector. It can't by any stretch of the imagination be considered material. Indeed, in statistical terms, it is within the margin of error. Given the above, I request that this site is taken out of the local plan. This will have no material effect on the objectively assessed need, but MBC, Maidstone Borough Council, will be seen to rectify what is seen by many as an injustice, and it will be seen to support localism, which I think is the original objective of neighbourhood planning and seems to have been forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perry. Councillor Mrs Gooch.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for allowing me to speak. I speak here in strong support of the local plan. I'm very proud that the officers of Maidstone Borough Council and councillors have had the courage to keep going in spite of all the objections. We kept at it. We had to. We, that's officers and members, were required by regulations to provide a local plan, warts and all. That is what we have done. The meetings, I've lost count of the number of meetings we had. I know one officer does know how many meetings. The agonising changes of mind when we wanted to take out certain areas because we knew they were so unpopular, but we had to put it back in to meet that assessed need. And we did it. Officers bent over backwards to repeat what we were required to do. And we did it, like it or not. None of us really wanted the development that we've got, whether it's Sutton Road, whether it's Barming, Hermitage Lane. But times have moved on, society has moved on. We need homes and we need jobs. That's what Junction 8 is about. It's one of our main fundamental areas for jobs, for all the homes that we need to build. And the beauty of this local plan, and yes, I repeat, it is the beauty, because I've got the guts to stand up and say that I'm proud of the plan, despite the huge opposition. In that plan, we have got strong policies to protect our countryside. It's not guaranteed, but what it does is to say to developers, you can't build where we're saying you can build unless you meet these high standards. And if those developers don't meet the high standards set out in our local plan, they won't get the planning permission. So on those grounds alone, I would urge members to recommend its adoption to full council. And I'm happy to stand and be proud of it, and to hell with everybody else.
Thank you, Councillor. Your passion noted. I see 4 indications. I shall start from my left and move clockwise. So, Councillor de Wigenden.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think there's obviously an awful lot of good in here. There's been an awful lot of work in here, and we all know we all have things which we don't like, and there's a bit of a balance. I have great sympathy for the people of Staplehurst with their petition, but as we've discussed previously, I understand that we actually have a choice, and as it's we don't actually have a position where we can take individual items out. We are here to actually either move this or not. For me, Junction 8 is still a bridge too far on this, and I think it's a terribly bad decision, and something which we will rue for a very long time. So I'm in a position where I don't think I can support this, and I shan't be.
Councillor Mrs. Springer.
Thank you. I've got a very little question I'd like to check with Mr. Edgerton at a later stage if it's possible. It's just on an actual urban boundary, but it's you have to zoom in so much on the online map. It's not an easy thing to describe. So if it's possible, I'd just like to come to you another time and just say, can you just check that that is right, or has it just slightly changed? That's just a very minor thing. We've been told we can't change anything, we can't take anything out, I get that. But following on from what Councillor Perry has said, in view of what appears to be a bit of an anomaly with the Staplehurst, the neighbourhood plan having been accepted as in general conformity with the local plan, and the site was in there, but it didn't conform, this could be a legal issue. This is quite an interesting little point. Is there any way that just that one thing can be, I don't know, not removed, but just checked? Because it seems their neighbourhood plan was examined, was found sound, with that site not in it, yet that site was already in our draft local plan. So it does seem there is a question of whether or not the inspector at that plan was correct to say it was in conformity with our plan. And I'm wondering whether that actually does need checking. Just a thought. I came here expecting we couldn't do any changes, but that's quite an interesting comment, and I just would like that checked at some stage. And then the last thing I'm just going to say is just a bit of a rant, I suppose. I'm with Councillor de Wigenden. Councillor Gooch, your passion is lovely, but I'm so sorry. The local plan should be done and supported by the people of the borough as generally what they support and they want. And in most cases it is, but I'm afraid with Woodcut Farm there is huge opposition, and it's not just from a few people, it's from a lot of people, a lot of parish councils, a lot of organisations. So I do hear your passion, but I totally support the sentiments of the first speaker from Staplehurst. And for them to have done their neighbourhood plan in good faith and then just see it overridden, disregarded. I know it's not our fault, it's the process that has allowed this to happen. I'm not criticising officers. I'm just saying the process is just so frustrating that they've put all their effort in, and it's like they might as well not have bothered, really. This is really, I'm not criticising officers, please. It is the process that's come down from government that seems to have allowed this to happen. Going back some 2 years, whilst chairing a committee, I said that we needed to take the people with us, that the people need to support this local plan. And we have done that in a lot of areas, but with Woodcut Farm we really haven't. And that's the big sticking point for me. And so I'm afraid I'm with Councillor Wiggindine. As long as Woodcut Farm is in, I am unable to support it. But I do understand the predicament that we are in. Thank you. Rent over.
We've had specific mention of the Staplehurst site and your comments related to process that puts us in this position. Not officers' fault, reality check if you don't mind. It was this committee that voted that site back in. It may not be exactly the same people, but it was this committee by a majority. That's why it's there. I personally didn't vote for it. I was against its inclusion, but that's how it happened. It wasn't put in by officers. The mandate for it to go back into the plan was pretty much the first meeting of this committee when we moved to the committee system. It was a democratic decision. I didn't support it, but it was the majority. I chaired the meeting. Councillor Mumford.
This will result in a question, but allow me to set the scene. The first thing I will say is I am independent, which means I don't have to agree with other independents. The gestation period of an elephant is 2 years. The gestation period of a local plan appears to be about 5 to 6 years, and it has been extremely painful. But if we look at our papers, everything that is going forward has been consulted on, discussed and argued and voted on by full council when we went to Regulation 19. When we did the amendments for the officers, that went to consultation and we voted on that as well. So we are responsible for where it is. My question that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and what we've been doing on the planning committee is we've been using the plan over the last 2 years. It's been gaining in weight. And so we are actually using the plan. And the last couple of 3 meetings, it's carried full weight. And for that, I do now have a concern. And my question will come later. But with this plan, we've got no anti-coalescent. We have not got a powerful EMV 28. I believe our LLVs do not have the strength as the green wedges did. I believe the application of SP17, which we've been using, is not strong. And my concern is for the green spaces in the urban edge. I think this plan needs to be stronger to protect those, and the open countryside from speculative applications. Now, in the fullness of time, we will see it. We will see it in the windfalls. I don't like using that word. We will see it in over-delivery, and we'll be able to analyse that. So that is a prediction. And my question is, if I've got a suit and it doesn't fit me, how I get it tailored, what is the opportunity of tailoring this plan once it's in? Is it a living document, or is it there for 20 years? And I think a lot of members, it will be helpful for us to know that we can adapt it and how we adapt it and how difficult that will be.
I have a view on this, but perhaps officers could answer. Mr. Jarman.
Do you want me to answer all the points, Chairman, or just the last one?
In reverse order, perhaps. Start with the last one and pick up the other bits.
Okay. Yes, as Councillor Manford has mentioned, yes, at Planning Committee, more and more weight has been placed on the local plan, as Councillor Manford alluded to, because it gains weight. I think it's got very high weight now because we've had the final report from the inspector who presided over an independent examination. The reason why, well, there's two reasons why we've allowed some greenfield sites to be released ahead of adoption, if I can put it that way. It's down to two reasons, really, and they overlap with each other. The first one is because our current plan, unfortunately, is from the year 2000, so 17 years ago. So, you know, I was going to say the objectively assessed need was completely different in the year 2000. In fact, there wasn't something called objectively assessed needs in the year 2000. It was the Kent Structure Plan would sort of divvy up how much housing was needed across Kent. And the other reason why Planning Committee have taken, in my opinion, the pragmatic decision of allowing some greenfield sites to be released on draft allocations is because we haven't had a 5-year land supply. I'm proud to say now, the inspector has said, we've got 6.1 years of supply. And as you said yourself, Councillor Munford, it's been a very painful process getting above that magic 5 years. But we were able to demonstrate it to an inspector against housing developers who are sitting where you are now. So we have got SP17 now, as you mentioned, but I think behind that we've got the power of a 5-year land supply plus a 20-year supply as well. In terms of, if I could just discuss now Junction 8, and that's twofold, really. As councillors will know, we...
Can I just interrupt you for a second, Mr. Jones? Councillor Mumford, you weren't mentioning specifically Junction 8, were you? Is that what you...
No, what my question was, I laid it in context. I'm concerned about greenfield sites, yes. But what I want to know is when and if this is voted through by full council, if we see trends like I'm predicting happening, what can we do? Have we got a plan that cannot be changed, or what is the process once we have seen these trends, undesirable trends? What is the process for changing the plan to stop it?
Thank you, councillors. Okay, so we are in a position where it's not possible to have a sort of living document in that regard. What we can't do is take parts of the local plan which don't appear to be appropriate at a given time and then remove them and add something else in. So we're at a stage here where we have a proposed local plan review, and that review is going to be what instigates change to the local plan. In the scenario where members decide ultimately at full council to adopt this local plan, officers will be seeking to engage in very quick order in a review of the local plan, which needs to be in place by April 2021. Now, as you've noted, it's not a quick process, so we're going to have to start that review very quickly. Now, the inspector, the government's inspector, has already provided some steer and guidance as to suggested matters that we as an authority may wish to consider. He listed those A to I as part of policy LPR1, which is contained within the local plan itself. So we are going to be in a position where, in the assumption that we adopt in that scenario, we will have an up-to-date, extant local plan to deal with development that comes forward, but we will be instigating a review very quickly with the opportunity of getting that in place by April 2021, and that will be the way we deal with the changes. Thank you.
I personally think it's one of the most compelling arguments for the reason why it is right to adopt this plan, is because there's perhaps an imperfect plan and there's a desire to make it much better before we adopt it. And that process is lengthy and will take a lot of time. And recent experience suggests perhaps a year or 2 or 3 to make change. And if we don't have the plan, we don't have the full weight of our protection policies. We will not have our calculated 5-year land supply and our 20-year trajectory. And they are the protection tools that we have in the short term, and we have to review anyway, which is the same as change in terms of timescale pretty much. So it's much, much better to take whatever certainty, whatever protection, whatever policy protection we can now, and of course work to its improvement. That's, I think, perhaps the most compelling argument overall. Councillor English had indicated next, and then I'm coming to Councillor Mrs Pendergast.
Well, before I say anything on what I was going to say, I would observe that there are 2 ways of, shall we say, dealing with development of a local plan. One is the most important one, I suppose, is the review process, but the other one is what supplementary planning documents one develops. We've already talked about in this very committee and elsewhere the air quality paper. There has got to be a revised residential extensions paper. There's got to be. And that also might take up, that's one of the ways we could take up issues, for example, which Councillor Cox has raised about gypsy day rooms and so on. That could be in that paper or another way. We've got comments from the inspector about biodiversity, landscape and heritage. These things could be in the review, but they could be addressed in that way. So it doesn't, and I would say that I don't entirely agree with Mr Edgerton. Whilst that we've moved some way away from the local development document approach, you know, you put a page in and you take a page out and you shuffle it all around, which was the original rather strange hokey-cokey approach of government some years ago. It isn't entirely a static process. There are many things we can do, but they all depend on having a local plan in place because you can't hang things off a peg if you don't have a peg in the first place, if you see what I mean. Go back to the tailoring point, you have to have a peg. Now, returning to the general issues, most of the issues that have been raised in this report and by members have been considered at great length. Some of them, like Junction 8, have been extremely controversial. There are many views about the particular form of the development that's been put forward and about the need or not. I'm not going to go into what my personal opinion is, but we are in a situation where those representations have been considered at great length by various committees of this council under both the previous system and under the current system. They've been tested at examination in public. We've had the inspector's final report and the modifications report. At this stage, if we throw it all out because of Junction 8, we will not succeed in preventing. Ironically, the one thing we won't do is prevent development of Junction 8, because in the period when we don't have a local plan, which given the gestation period of this one could be anything up to 6 to 7 years if we do it again, there's a guarantee that in that vacuum development will continue to take place. So the one certainty is that there will be development of Junction 8. The question is what sort of development, how it can be controlled. Well, in the absence of a local plan, it can't be. Similarly, in terms of the housing development, the one certainty is that if we don't have a local plan, housing applications and current appeals will not go away. In the period when we're redoing the local plan, almost all of the sites that are currently contentious will be built out. Some of them have already got planning consent, some are subject to appeals for non-determination, others are in the pipeline. But without a local plan in place, those sites will be built. The risk is not only will those sites be built, but additional sites will be built. People who've been paying attention, which I hope includes everyone in this room, will have noticed that Medway Council has just lost its prime development site at Lodge Hill. The public inquiry will now not be going ahead, and that site will not be, almost certainly not be developed. Under the duty to cooperate, we are faced with a situation where if we don't move ahead, we will not be looking just at providing for our own need, but at least some of the overspill from Medway. And I'm sick and tired of councillors who disagree with comments that are made in committee, sighing, making eyes and generally muttering rudely as if comments made by other councillors... Can I ask you to conform to the substantive matter of the debate, please? So all I would say, Mr Chairman, is that if people think that by not recommending this plan for adoption, because we're not adopting it tonight, we will prevent a single one of these developments, they are wrong. Now, what I would say, however, is that it does sadden me that there isn't no room for manoeuvre. And I have checked this out in great detail because Dr Duncan and the residents of Staplehurst in relation to this particular allocation do have a reasonable argument. And if there was any way at all, and I really mean this, any legal mechanism at all for singling out this particular allocation and removing it from the plan, I will be recommending that here and now, because I'm not happy with, far from happy about how we got here. The trouble is, having checked it, I don't think there is a legal way, because it is material. PINs have confirmed that. And I believe, although I'm not going to ask us to go into part 2 to discuss it unless members want to discuss it further, that our own legal advice confirms that too. So with great regret on that particular item, I really do feel that we have to move forward. I am sorry in relation to that Staplehurst site. What I would say is that if we did pull the local plan, it would not stop that site being developed. It would happen if we pull the plan, just as much as if we didn't.
I think the Staplehurst one is slightly more complex than that because there is an extant neighbourhood plan. So they perhaps would have a protection, but there might be other sites beyond both that is the larger threat. And certainly speaking for my own ward, you know, there's a site, it's been refused, it's at appeal, another couple of hundred over and above. I mean, these are huge over and above, but if we don't have a plan that says no, we're in deep trouble. And the 5-year land supply that stands behind the answer no. Councillor Mrs Prendergast, you're the last one indicating. Although Councillor Mrs Street, you want to speak again? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. Mr Edgerton started his introduction to this by saying we're nearing the end of this difficult period. I acknowledge all the hard work that's gone in, considerable amount of hard work, and he almost sort of preempted me because he's just said that as we go into the review, that's when we can instigate change. So all I'm saying is, it's a plea really. Can we, as we go into the review, just really listen and try and align ourselves with the residents of this borough? As an elected member, I really feel at this point I have to say that those who've put me in this chamber do not feel that their voice has been heard. So again, let's try and do that. And I do acknowledge all the hard work that's gone in. That's not to say that I'll be supporting the local plan. Thank you.
Well said, Councillor. Finally, I would just like to put something else in, and that's to concur with Councillor English. I mean, I too, over this last week, have spent hours poring through documents, copies of the legislation, to see if there are mechanisms to make change at this stage. What I read directly in the legislation didn't lead me to believe there was a possibility. I've turned to others for interpretation, our own officers. there is advice from council, but perhaps the simplest, straightest answer actually came directly from PINS, from the Planning Inspectorate. It was in very plain English, and it was a direct response to, can we make changes? And it simply says, Section 23 of the Act concerns the adoption of the local plan. It does not allow, underlined, for a local planning authority to make any material changes to a local plan in adopting the plan, other than the modifications set out by the inspector. It's just not an option. I wish it were, I really do, but it isn't. It's a take it or leave it, one chance scenario. Councillor Mrs. Springett.
Thank you. I think Councillor English put into words much better what I was sort of trying to say. So well done. I think we all feel the same actually on that point. So I don't think I need to go there. It was just a very quick question actually. It's arisen from what Councillor Mumford commented on. When we do our review, does the review allow us to, if we wanted to, try and strengthen SP17, or does it not cover? I know the review lets us put up our housing and put up more. It's not going to let us put it down, but it would certainly let us put it up and add things in. Would it allow us to tweak the wording to strengthen a policy such as SP17? I'm only asking because actually I don't know.
It's a very interesting question, and one where, I think we've all looked at policies and thought, I just wonder if only we could, and that sort of thing. We obviously have a government framework to operate within, the National Planning Policy Framework itself, but I see no reason why we can't consider trying to strengthen the policy as long as it's aligning with the government's requirements and objectives. So I think at a later date, as part of the planning review, we may well be in the position to try that. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, could I just add to that? As Mark said, the straightforward answer is yes. But I wouldn't like to give the impression that SP17 is weak in relation to ENV28. Quite frankly, with a 5-year land supply, if somebody puts in a planning application for 100 houses on a greenfield site, the answer should be no. It's a different story with brownfield sites, potentially, but greenfield sites, the point you made, Councillor Munford, the answer should be no.
And I very much hope that if anything slips through the net in the future, that, and an appeal decision goes against us, we will have the confidence to challenge that with a JR and actually test it to the nth degree and stand up for our residents. I actually feel that we're duty-bound to put this to full council. This should not be a decision for 9 of us tonight. This needs to go to the full body of full council for full 55 members to consider. Therefore, from the chair, I will move the motion. There's an amendment to what is on the paper just to capture these very minor amendments. But I'm moving that this committee recommends to full council that the Maidstone Borough Local Plan 2017 in Appendix 6, subject to minor factual and typographical corrections, which incorporates the inspector's main modifications and the policies map at Appendix 7, be adopted. So I move that from the chair. Councillor Cox has seconded. I'll go straight to the vote. Those in favour, please. Those against? Abstentions? Thank you, members. That is carried and it will be recommended to full council for consideration. We can go back to agenda item 15 now. Agenda item 15, this is relation to the community infrastructure levy charging schedule approval. Mr. Thompson. There you are.
Thank you, Chairman. This report marks a significant milestone in the process of the Council introducing the SIL in Maidstone and becoming a charging authority. The SIL charging schedule has been developed alongside the local plan to provide a key source of funding towards many of the infrastructure improvements required to support planned growth.
Council resolved at their December meeting to submit the draft charging schedule for examination, and hearings were held in June. The examiner's report was subsequently published on the 31st of July and concludes that, subject to a number of modifications, the charging schedule provides an appropriate basis for the introduction of the sill in Maidstone. The examiner's recommendations and reasoning are summarised at paragraphs 2.17 to 2.19 of the report and set out in full at Appendix D for committee's consideration. In short, the examiner is satisfied the Council's viability and infrastructure planning evidence is robust, and he finds that no substantive changes are required. The charging rates as submitted are considered to be justified, and the charging zone boundaries remain consistent with the local plan. The recommended modifications, although relatively minor in nature, will serve to add clarity to the charging schedule through improved mapping and more accurate definition of the charges. The examiner's modifications are therefore incorporated into the charging schedule at Appendix A. At the point of final approval of the charging schedule, the Council must also set the date at which it will take effect. The implications of this date are significant, and paragraphs 2.22 to 2.26 of the report set out some of the key considerations on this matter. At the agreed date, relevant undetermined planning applications, including applications with a resolution to grant subject to 106 from Planning Committee, may become liable for the sill. Effective operational arrangements must be established and properly resourced. Taking this into account, it is clear that a meaningful period is required to facilitate effective transition, and for these reasons, the 1st of July 2018 is recommended as the take-effect date. Given the examiner's conclusions, the report sets out that the Council can be recommended to approve the modified charging schedule, the Regulation 123 list and instalments policy, with an effective implementation date of the 1st of July next year. The approval of the charging schedule is effectively the first of three components for the implementation of the sill in Maidstone. Paragraph 2.27 sets out the remaining elements, starting with administrative arrangements which must be established and in place for the take-effect date. These will set out how the Council will deliver the day-to-day operational tasks involved to ensure the effective collection and monitoring of sill monies. To facilitate the allocation of sill receipts to specific infrastructure projects, once monies are collected, governance arrangements will also be required to establish a framework for decision-making. And given the differing urgency and the lively complexity of each of these components, the report proposes to bring a report on the administrative elements to committee in November, in line with the work programme seen earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Thompson. Councillor Bryce was the only one that had indicated to speak as visiting member on that, but she's not here, so open the debate to members if there's any questions or comments. Councillor Willis.
If I missed that, because I was looking at a site on the local plan, when will the review period be for sill rates? How long into, after this starts in July 18, I can see that, but how long do we review the rates we charge? Our chair did bring this up about 6 months ago when we first started looking at it.
It's actually one of the issues that was discussed during the examination hearings, and one of the modifications, I think it's EM6, actually includes a reference within the charging schedule document to circumstances where we would review the charging rates, and given the imminent nature of the local plan review, that was referenced to be connected with the local plan review. But clearly there will be a need for annual monitoring of the effectiveness of sill and the implications, and there's actually a reporting process involved as well. That will be part of the administrative arrangements report to be addressed in November. So there will be regular opportunities to monitor the implications and effects of the rates on development.
Thank you. So Willis again.
So just to understand that fully, in November, will this committee, if we're voting to approve this, to go to full council, to go to vote to full council, we won't know how often it can be reviewed. I think you're talking about when the local plan's reviewed, or are you saying there is a potential to review it after a year because of the rates that we can charge for sill? Yeah, there's a charge to review it after a year. We'll know that in November, or will we not know that? That at the moment we've got to assume that's until the local plan's reviewed. What's the simple answer on that?
Yeah, just to clarify this matter, the authority has discretion to undertake a review of the community infrastructure levy as it desires. Now, the only thing I would say is that we are constrained by government process in the same way that we were with the local plan. So we wouldn't be able to change rates if we saw short-term trends indicating that it may be conducive to do so. We would need to go through full consultation processes, assemble a robust evidence base, and then go through independent examination of the community infrastructure levy as well. So this is why Mr Thompson is saying, alignment with the local plan review process is actually pretty much ideal. We can assemble evidence bases to support both documents, saving the authority money, and bring forward robust evidence and in a coordinated way.
Really, within the review process, so it could be 4 years. Sorry.
We would be in a position of being able to bring forward a review to the community infrastructure levy forward before the local plan review if it was absolutely necessary. The reason for that is because we would be able to also associate the existing local plan if it were to be adopted, the local plan we've discussed tonight, and update the evidence base on the premise of the policies that are in place for that local plan as well. So we would be in a stronger position if we wanted to bring forward a review of the community infrastructure levy. But yes, obviously the fallback position would be that we would assemble the evidence and use that jointly with the local plan review, but we could do it sooner if we so wished.
Councillor Wilby.
Hi, I was just wondering whether on page 76 at some point, obviously not tonight because obviously I think that'll take a bit too long to work out, if we could actually have some working examples of how this calculation works. Obviously the R times A times I little p over IC. Obviously all these things refer to stuff outside this document, which to tell you the truth, obviously I'd like to see how this actually works in relevance.
And you've got C and GCSE there.
I mean, that might be something we could pick up in a future workshop, perhaps, if you want a more detailed understanding of that, unless there's a short answer.
I take it there isn't.
This is a three-stage process, so members tonight will be looking at the principle of the charging rates and getting SIL through to adoption. We'll then be moving through into the administrative processes in that arena and making sure that's robust and ready for the July implementation date. And then we'll move forward into the overall governance of the community infrastructure levy and distribution. So there'll be plenty of opportunities in the future, and we're in the work programme. We note that there are reports which will also be dealing with those elements too, and that can include some further work on that matter.
Sorry, just one last thing. I take it as well that we have incorporated some parish training in with this, because obviously they're quite heavily involved.
It's intended that that will absolutely be a key component, subject to previous decisions of this committee, and that will feed into the November report.
Councillor English, then Councillor de Wigan.
Parish training is definitely ahead of the cart, ahead of the horse, to be honest. Right. In order to avoid the sort of mistakes that this council, and I'm not talking about any members here or officers here, but has happened in the past, there is a need now to be considering how we talk, not just with parishes, although that's very, very important, but with representatives of the unparished areas and those communities like North Lewes that have got a neighbourhood plan which is sort of halfway in between, about the governance arrangements. They shouldn't be being left to the third part of the tranche as a sort of afterthought. They need to be talked about now and thought about now. And I have had my differences recently with the leadership of the Kent Association of Local Councils Area Committee, but there needs to be a discussion with them yesterday about how these governance arrangements are going to work. Because we cannot have a training exercise or leave the governance arrangements to the end. They need to be talked about now, because there are different ways of doing this, and considerably different ways. But the important thing is there is an inclusive discussion between all the relevant stakeholders with all their different hats or whatever And I think we need to put that in the work programme for this committee so that we actually have a target. I'm not saying in the next meeting, but that we need to have it in the work programme so that we have a committee date that the reports and consultations are working to. Otherwise, it will never happen.
Governance is the big concern that I have. I think you've hit the nail on the head. We'll make specifically that communication consultation topic a feature of our work programme at the earliest opportunity. I'm sure the Vice Chair will support that.
Consultation, not just one-way communication.
Yes, but these are huge uncharted territories. You know, there are very significant monies that are going to be devolved down to parish level or to neighbourhood plan level. You know, £500,000 million a time is quite easily, and you know how we get that collaborative working to ensure that it actually, you know, buys meaningful infrastructure, you know, medical centre improvements, junction, whatever it is, that's vitally important. Mr. Egerton, you want to add to that?
Thank you. Very briefly, just to say that we are, if you have a look at the work programme, we already have items associated with SIL governance, we have items associated with the infrastructure roadmap and so forth. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for members to get their teeth into this into the future.
Councillor de Wigandon.
Work out the have a look at the figures. The SIL amount, it's per square metre. That's going to be charged on the gross internal area of a property, or is it a different calculation?
Yeah, that's correct. It's gross, measured on gross internal area. It's set out in the regulations.
Okay, maybe that's something we'll come to later. Because thinking about these figures, it just seemed that the numbers we were looking at seemed to be rather small. That was all. It's fine. Presumably that's something we'll come to.
I think there's plenty of viability work that's been undertaken in the background, seeing how it compares to current, say, 106 arrangements. And, you know, I think the anticipation is that the amount of money may be fairly similar overall. But for me, the big advantage of SIL is the flexibility that it gives us to be able to accumulate sums from a number of development for a significant item, as opposed to the restrictions in the rules of 106s of how many we can pull, how immediate in the vicinity. So, you know, on the assumption that broadly the amount of take from developers is the same, the flexibility, I think, is nothing short of advantageous. And on that basis, I move the recommendations per the papers that we take this to full council. Shall I read the words? I think the recommendation here is quite specific about inviting full council. So I recommend or accept that it actually is in the work programme.
Well, I don't think it's drawn together, but so I would like us. Yeah, I saw
Okay,
that, but
well,
it's not in the recommendation.
I'll allow you to form precisely the words for a separate recommendation, but for this moment, I move as per the papers from the chair. Councillor Cox, thank you for seconding. Please indicate if in favour. That is unanimous and therefore carried. Thank you, members. Councillor English, back to you for a further recommendation.
Essentially, all I really want is paragraph 229, disregarding the first sentence. In other words, reading it is proposed, therefore, to bring a report to committee in November to set out the key issues, actually incorporated as a separate resolution rather than being in the supporting text.
Including involvement of parishes.
Yes, from it onwards, paragraph 2.29, omitting the first sentence. I just want that as a resolution rather than in the supporting text.
So if it says that this committee requests a report to, and so on, and we've got the dates of the work programme.
This committee requests a report. This committee requests the report setting out key issues for consideration and the rest of the sentence to the November committee meeting.
You're proposing? I'll second that, Councillor. Now take that to the vote. Those in favour? Members, those in favour? This is a recommendation for Parish Council vote. That is unanimous and therefore carried. Members, I'm looking for another 2 or 3 hours' work here and I can't find it on the agenda. I think... thank you, everybody, for your attendance, and we'll close the meeting. Thank you.